Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you. So today we're going to be discussing Safavid Iran. This period is a very influential period in terms of the religious and political makeup of the Middle East. This is the period which sees the wholesale conversion over the course of course, 2 centuries of the Iranian plateau and the southern Caucasus to Shi'i Islam. Before this, predominantly, most of the inhabitants of these places were from the Sunni branch of Islam. But in this period, you see the beginnings of not just the formation of a distinct Iranian political identity, but also of a Twelver Shia religious identity. The origins of this, of course, go back to a mystical order. So far, what we've seen of mystical and Sufi orders is the emirs and the actual rulers, who are not Sufi sheikhs in and of themselves, engage with mystical orders in order to lend themselves legitimacy. They form alliances, sometimes even marriage alliances, with local Sufis. And in Timur's time, he's a very good example of this, he actually visits, we think, the founder of the Safavid order. The eponymous founder, Safiuddin, was visited by Timur, and various chronicles speak of a kind of meeting of minds between them and a conferral of this mystical authority from the sheikh onto Timur. However, as time goes by, the Safavid order becomes more and more militant itself. It starts to attract more and more emirs that do obeisance to it, and it starts to formulate and rethink some of its mystical ideas in line with the beliefs and the militant ardor of the Turkmen and Kurdish tribes that are frequenting and really adhering to this Sufi order. So what are some of these mystical beliefs? I think perhaps the most important foundation to lay down here is the cosmogony of the Sufi order, the origins of all existence. Prior to God's creation of the universe, he first cast the light, and that light was Muhammad. That light was of Nebuwwet, or prophethood. And that is the exoteric aspect of Islam, of truth. Hidden within that light is the light of Ali, the light of vilayat, or guardianship, custodianship over the esoteric truth. The exoteric, the zahir, is identified with the Quran, the rituals, the Sharia, and the esoteric is identified with the mystical understanding, that personal relationship of communion with the divine. And it is within this cosmogony that you have the establishment of a lineage. We are lucky to have the divan of Ismail, one of the descendants of Safiuddin, who really turns it from a militant order into an imperial dynasty. In it, he claims to be descended from that union of light between Ali and Muhammad. In the divan of his poetry, we read, Biz ol azaldan var ölübdür, Muhammadle Aliye yar ölübdür. We have existed since before the beginning, as Muhammad was joined by Ali. Its mystery was unleashed upon the world, and yet it has been revealed to all the faithful. He's essentially claiming a form of revelation here. And his lineage is not even of this earthly plane. His lineage is, you can kind of guess, superior and unlike any other royal or dynastic lineage whatsoever. Previously, in the talk about the Timurids, we touched on the importance of lineage and how, in order to make a claim to ultimate imperial authority, khanship, you needed to have been a descendant of Genghis Khan. This is an utter rejection of that. It doesn't engage with that mode of thinking at all. Instead, it traces the lineage of the Sheikh, the Sufi order's leader, to not even human mere mortals, but people who are beyond the realm of existence, whose existence predates the creation of the universe. These are the very heart of meaning and of Islam, of haqqaniyat, truth, divine truth, and haqq. And that is precisely the claim that Ismail makes. In his divan, we also read, Anal haq sirri osh gönlümde gizli, ke haqqı mutlaqim, haq söylerim men. I am the haqq, the divine truth. Its secret is hidden in my heart, for I am the absolute haqq, and I speak haqq. This is quite blasphemous to the ears of most of the Sunni Orthodox ulama, and it really speaks to the mystical and antinomian Sufistic notions that are really much more predominant among popular adherents to the faith, especially those Turkmen and Kurdish emirs that are gravitating towards the Sufi order.
I'm assuming that An-al-Haq is a reference to Al-Halaj's famous proclamation, An-al-Haq,
which becomes part and parcel of the language of Sufism. The notion that the self is actually an alienation from the divine truth. And this central kind of idea, this concept of wahdatul wujud, or the unity of existence. In Rumi's poetry, for example, you find again this notion of Bahr al-Asrar, the sea of mysteries. And that represents the divine truth. That represents that which actually exists. And kind of like how you see waves crashing upon waves in the sea, for a few moments, a droplet might become separated and gain this false impression that it is separate from the sea, before those few seconds are up and it is crashing down and subsumed back into the sea of mystery. That is the idea that you see in a lot of cases with people proclaiming An-al-Haq. It is the death of the ego and subsuming into the one whole divine truth, going back into the sea of mystery.
A famous bait by Hafiz about An-al-Haq, which is Guft an ya ke az ul gesht, Sarmidal Balend, Jomash in Hud, Asra Hoveida Mikaret. Which, my beloved, became upon the gallows, which is referring to Al-Halaj, who was executed. His crime was that he made the secrets visible.
And I think the reference to the gallows, it's appealing in kind of domestic Sufi to the idea of ego death. But for the Turkmen and Kurdish emirs, what is appealing, do you think, about this? The proximity to death. What are they doing on a day-to-day basis? Yes?
Fighting, raiding, killing people, violence. Very much every day could be their last.
Yes.
Either it's because, I got too drunk and I got into a fight and my hand hit a table and now I'm gone, or we're raiding this village in Nero, strikes me in the neck, I'm dead. So it's very much the close relationship with death.
The ever proximity of death is, I think, part and parcel of why we see this form of Islam really take hold of the nomadic Turkmen and Kurdish emirs and warriors on the frontiers. And it makes sense that they would see in Ismail a true and worthy leader, a charismatic authority that can build a coalition of Sufi warriors and lead them in a sacral struggle. And that struggle is universal as well as sacral, because it views the entirety of history as a binary war between the Yazidis, the people who have oppressed the lineage of the Prophet, and those who have stood up for the Prophet's household and the Imams. The Umayyads, of course, who murdered Hussein at Karbala would fit very neatly into the opposite camp. And Ismail, what would he claim? That he is not only a guardian of the Prophet's lineage, but he himself is the very essence of it. He is the true haq. And of course, going back to Biz ol azaldan var ulubdur, we have existed since before the beginning, identifying himself with the very core and essence of that lineage. Which leads to the claim that he is the universal ruler, the true and legitimate ruler of the Ummah. Muhammad ummetin rehberiyam. I am the leader over the community of Muhammad. There's a problem in a lot of the historiography, and I mean Western historiography, not just nationalist historiography, because what you see is the Safavids being cast as the kind of revival or the re-establishment of an Iranian national state. And sometimes, if you go to Azerbaijan, they have their own kind of pseudo-nationalistic kind of view of this history, where it's the establishment of an Azerbaijani state. This is absolutely not the case. You never see a single reference to either Iran or Azerbaijan in Shah Ismail's poetry. Not one single reference to either place. You see repeated references to the notion of a universal struggle and the struggle to reimpose the rule, the vilayat of Ali, the guardianship of Ali, over the Muslim community. Yes?
You also find the term Iran Zami, or Iran, in texts which belong to the Sunni period of Iran, such as Hamdallah Mustafi and his Timurid historians like Hafiz Abru. So it's very much a term which existed before the Safavid period.
Yes, and that's curious that you would think that Ismail would engage in some level with the notion of Iran Shah. But of course, he's not really interested in really grounding his authority in the imperial realm of Iran. He makes plenty of references to how he is the universal ruler over the entirety of the Muslim community. And I think the geographic location really is part of this, because he's coming to power mostly in the western peripheries of Iran Zamin, so what is now Diyarbakir, South Caucasus and Azerbaijan, but also many of his potential adherents, these Turkmen and Kurdish kind of entities, they live in Rum or Anatolia. So it's not really, he's straddling two imperial geographies, and he's not committing to either one. And he's far more ambitious than to really center his authority. His authority is one that spreads across Muhammad ummetin rehberiyam. I am the leader over the community of Muhammad everywhere. And you see this. Adım Shah Ismail haqqan shiriyam, bu cümle qazilerin serveriyam. My name is Shah Ismail, verily I am the lion. I am the lion here is a reference to his ancestor, because Haydar, Arabic for lion, is very much identified with the first of the Shi'a Imams, Ali. Atım qanı aldım Yazid'den, yaqin bilgil ke naqd Haydariyam. And this really points to the notion of taking revenge for the family of the Prophet. They have been usurped by Turco-Mongol, Umayyad, all of the people who have come to guard and come to rule over the Muslim community through illegitimate means. He is killing them and avenging the blood of his ancestors, Hussein and Ali. Atam qanı aldım Yazid'den. I have avenged the blood of my father from Yazid. And Yazid, the person who is responsible for the murder of Imam Hussein in the Battle of Karbala, he is not just a historical figure. He is identified with anyone that Shah Ismail is waging a war and a campaign with in his own time, whether it be the Ottomans, the Uzbeks. And the reference to Jahan, the universe, is something that you find again and again in the Divan. Jahan baştan başa hep leşker oldu, حسین کربلا سردار علوبدر. The world, the universe, from one end to the other, is full of armies, swarms with men. Hussein Karbala Sardar Ulubdur. And Hussein of Karbala has become the general. This notion that the Battle of Karbala is not truly over, that we are still fighting in that same cosmic struggle of the family of the Prophet against the usurpers. And so this is something else that nationalist historiography distorts quite badly. In Iran, there's an emphasis on, well, they were originally from a Kurdish clan, and Sheikh Safiuddin comes from he's the grandson of a Kurdish chieftain and emir, therefore he's really Kurdish, and since Kurds are ethno-linguistically within the Iranic group, this means he's kind of ethno-nationally part of our history. And then you have the Azerbaijani flip side of this, which claims, well, they were Turkic-speaking at the very least, so this puts them part of the Turkic, Azerbaijani Turkic, and national history of the Turks. Yes?
There's a very strange Persian nationalist notion associated with this, which is that the Shi'a doctrines of the Safavids are tied to some sort of Persian nationalism.
Yes, that is That is another point that is raised in this nationalist historiography. The idea that Shah Ismail is motivated by Iranian nationalism, and the only reason that he chooses Shi'ism is to distinguish the new Iranian national self that he's building from the Ottoman and Uzbek others. So he's making a kind of religious kind of nationalism take hold in Iran. This is utterly absurd. As we've seen, there is absolutely no notion of Shah Ismail and the Qizilbash, his followers, being Iranian. They are very much concerned with Shi'a Islam. The notion of Iran will come into the Safavid world, but only after Shah Ismail, and for reasons that we will discuss. But their notion of lineage is the Imami lineage. Again and again, they commission genealogies in their poetry, make reference to being descendants of the 12 Shi'a Imams, the Prophet's household. That is the only thing that really matters to them. In one of their genealogies, it is claimed, Fakhr Arab darim ma. We have honor over the Arab. This isn't kind of an ethnic or national identification as Arab. It is an identification with the family of the Prophet that is considered to be the greatest household and lineage among all of the Arabs. So rather than any ethnic or national kind of lineage, their lineage should be understood as a distinctly mystical one that connects them with really a primordial force. Biz ol azaldan var olubdur. We have existed since before the beginning. This is not an ethnic kind of community or lineage. This is a family that transcends space and time. This is the lineage of the Prophet and the Imams. That is at the heart and core of their legitimacy. So we talked about them embracing a militant ethos. Because what is the day-to-day of the Turkmen and Kurdish adherents to the Sufi order? They are gathering, and of course they are partaking in the rituals, but in terms of their economic and political makeup, they are war bands. They are primed for raiding. And the Sufi order really provides an organization, ideologically and organizationally, of this war band to bind together these raiding parties, to fuse them under a very powerful and emotive notion of taking revenge for the household of the Prophet and unleash them onto potential targets in the Caucasus, in Iraq, and in Anatolia. And this is when you have the formation of a very distinct Qizilbash identity. Qizilbash is Turkish for red caps. What does that mean? In a dream, we are told that Haidar, the father of Ismail, is visited by Ali. And in that dream, he fashions a 12-gourd crown, a cap. And he says, do the same for your followers. This is part and parcel, a ritualistic kind of element in establishing a new community, warrior community for the Sufi order. And they all start donning red caps. They also have various traditions and modes of conduct. So they start shaving their heads. They also shave their beards and grow out their moustaches. This is to really identify them as a form of kind of a uniform body that adheres to a single faith, partakes in the same rituals, and has visually as well as spiritually bound itself, made itself one under the sheikh. It's a remarkably successful campaign, or rather a series of campaigns, because as you can see from this map, this small group of Sufi warriors that are bound together, and this really speaks to the power of ideology in not just Middle Eastern history, but in history in general. The power of ideology that forges a colossal empire that you can start to see it corresponds more or less to that old geographic notion of Iran Shahr or Iran Zamin, stretching from the Euphrates all the way to the Oxus. This will, after Shah Ismail's time, become significant as part of a political identity and the notion of the Safavids being rulers of a particular realm, a particular kingdom. And the Qizilbash, although they start off as a Turkic-speaking confederation of nomads, predominantly from Turkmen kind of backgrounds and many from Kurdish backgrounds and other backgrounds to some extent, they come to be identified with this realm of Iran. And his successor, Tahmasp, he really leans into this notion that he is ruling over a specific imperial realm. He is not just the sheikh, the murshid, the spiritual guide of the Safavid order, but at the same time, and just as importantly, he is the Shahanshah over the Mamalik-e Iran, the dominions of Iran. And he pens various letters. These are, I think, the first diplomatic letters in which we clearly have a sovereign speaking to another sovereign and laying out his territorial claims. He says, coveted by this paradisiac Iran is coveted by the Uzbeks of Turan and the Ottomans, the Romans, for it includes Mazandaran, Khorasan, Sejistan, Fars, Iraq of both Arab Iraq and Persian Iraq, Western Iran, and Azerbaijan. He's laying out the territorial claims and where Iran is and where it is not. And he's saying he's duty-bound to guard these Mamalik-e Mawrusi, these inherited dominions. So even Shah Ismail, even though Shah Ismail didn't really have any idea of ruling over an Iranian realm, his son manufactures and constructs this claim in order to cement his authority in those territories that are left to him. Because they managed to establish more or less a stable frontier in the east against the Uzbeks, running along the Oxus. And then in the west, when they try to conquer Anatolia, they are checked and badly defeated by the Ottomans in the Battle of Chaldiran, which really limits them to this side of the Oxus. So Tahmasp is really engaged in consolidating ideologically and institutionally his holdings within this territory. And it's quite convenient then to revive and leverage this notion of Iran Zamin as the realm. But of course, there are distinct Shi'i notions of Iran that develop here. Iran becomes not just an imperial realm, but also an imperial Shi'i realm. The very soil of it is sacralized. But still, this is a far cry from the Iranian nationalist understanding of what Iran is and what it is not. Because it's distinct from the 20th century nationalism that we see, that places Persian as an ethnic identity. First of all, it creates an ethnic identity for Persians, which had not been the case, but also linguistically, Persian becomes the language of Iran. This is not what we see in this period. There is no notion of Persian as an ethnicity, and there is no notion of ethnicity to begin with. This is a European idea. There are different lineages and tribes. None of them are supposed to be any more important or less important than the other or central. Really, the only lineage is the sacral lineage of the ruling household that ties them to the prophet and the imams, and all else are subservient and obedient to that lineage. Also, the notion of language is very different from modern Iranian nationalism. This is an intensely multilingual society. They are every bit as fluent and partial to Turkish as they are to Persian. And Arabic is considered a very important language for this imperial culture. What you have is, for example, even the Tajiks, the people who are identified with the administration of the realm, that compose most of their documents, almost all of them in Persian, they are required to know the other two main lingua francas of the realm, which are Turkish and Arabic. And this is attested to in a Safavid administration manual, where you have all chancellery scribes must know the language of padishahs and the ordinances and customs of the sultans of the world, having a command of each of the languages of Arabic, Persian, and Turkish. So we see that this isn't even unique to Iran. This is something that Ottoman chancellery officials and bureaucrats would also be quite familiar with. If you're an erudite Ottoman official, then of course, not only do you know Ottoman Turkish, but you know your Persian and your Arabic as well. If you're somewhere in Turan, the Khanates of the Uzbeks, likewise, you know your Quran, you know your classical Arabic, as well as your Persian, as well as your Turkish. In Mughal India, very much the same. And this is where you have the formation of the capaciously cultured dominions of Iran. So far from a national and homogenized entity, what you have is an imperial entity that stretches from the Euphrates to the Oxus and encompasses various traditions and languages. And the people who live in this space, they read Alishir Navai, the great Turkic poet from Central Asia, but they also read Sa'di and Hafiz in their original Persian. They themselves will hold banquets and at court will discuss various matters in Turkish. And then when it comes to drafting a deed or an edict or a decree, they will sit down and write it out in Persian. But that Persian, that chancellery prose, will be interspersed with various Quranic and Hadith quotes in erudite Arabic. It shows that this is a trilingual society. And to be able to fluently speak and eloquently compose literature and verse and prose in all three major languages is a mark of being cultured in this society. And the Shahnameh makes a comeback. Already you had a great interest in the Shahnameh from the Ilkhanid period. But what you have under the Safavids is a resurgence of interest where all of those talented Timurid painters and artisans and calligraphers, after the collapse of the Timurids, they seek employment in two major empires, the Mughals in India and also the Safavids in Iran. And Safavid centers of patronage take these on and want them to form new manuscripts of the Shahnameh and illustrate them in the new fashion. And what you have on the right is a very good example of this from, I think, the early 17th century. This is commissioned in the reign of Abbas the Great. And it shows just going to call it a phoenix, the Qurqnus that takes Rustam's father onto a nest. All of these mythical aspects of ancient Iranian lore, legend, they are an important part of creating a cultural universe in which the Safavid Shahs can not only Shi'ify their identity, but they can also sacralize it in the pre-Islamic mode of discourse. So not only are they the sheikh, the murshid of a Sufi and a Shi'i order, they are also the inheritors of Jamshid's throne, of Khosrow's throne. All of the great pre-Islamic imperial sovereigns, they have handed out the throne of dominion to the Safavids, and this book art is part and parcel of the Safavids commissioning and patronizing this view among their own elites and beyond. Because many of these Shahnameh, for example, the Tahmasp Shahnameh, was a gift to the Ottoman Sultan. So in gift exchanges, not only are you telegraphing your own wealth and imperial munificence, but also encoded in those gifts, you have the ideology of your dynasty, of why you are a legitimate ruler in the lands that you claim to hold authority over. And the cementing and fusion of Iranian political identity with Shi'ism really reaches its apex under Shah Abbas, roughly 100 years after the establishment of the dynasty. In one of the letters to his Ottoman counterpart that he's waging war against, he's talking about why he can't give up his territorial claims in the South Caucasus and in Iraq. And it reads, as the Iranian state, Dawlat-e-Iran, is the throne of Ali ibn Abi Talib, the first Imam, of course, and the refuge of the blessed Twelver Shia faith, I cannot surrender an inch of its territories to your majesty, my dear brother, and I am compelled to continue this war as honor demands it of me. So here you have the fusion of these two, but also you see the very explicit reference to Twelver Shia faith. This marks the, I wouldn't say urbanization, but the establishment of very close links between the Safavid dynasty and the orthodox, Twelver, juristic-minded ulema of the Shia faith. Some of them are even invited over from Lebanon to come and settle in Iran and to guide this new cadre of Shi'i learned ulema and scholars, these talibs or seminary students, in various madrasas. The Safavids set out endowments and various estates dedicated to the upkeep of Shia shrines, but also Shia madrasas. They build alliances with these very powerful and increasingly influential Shi'i ulema. And it's not that they build a common kind of alliance, it's that they really take it from a peripheral and not so powerful class of religious scholars and build it up into one of the pillars of the state that has great influence in the provinces and in urban centers, but also amongst the common laity, and helps them solidify control and administrative hold in pretty much the entirety of the Muslim-dominated areas of their empire. So this is something that is also not really appreciated by the Iranian nationalist historiography. The notion that it's first and foremost Shi'i and then Iranian. The Iranianness of the Safavids is really contained within and contextualized within their Shi'i faith. Because in every single coin and in every single seal, you see repeated references to the Shia Imams. In fact, you don't see a single reference to Iran in any of these imperial seals, nor any of the numismatic prints. It's a major discourse, but really, when it comes to telegraphing in a very short space, in a very small space, what the identity and the legitimacy of the state and the dynasty is all about, it's Shi'i Islam. So here, the numismatic print, you can see all around it, you have Muhammad, Ali, Hassan, Hussein, so starting with the Prophet Muhammad, and then the 12 Imams. This only changes very little, and it changes from the period of Shah Ismail to the post-Ismaili period, all the way down to the end of the dynasty. Ismail put his own name also in this kind of lineup, which is a semi-kind of blasphemous and apocalyptic thing to do. The notion that he was really suggesting to many of his followers that he might be the Mahdi. He was claiming to be the promised savior, the second coming, the reincarnation of the 12th and last Imam. But of course, as time goes on and the charisma of the Safavid dynasty is routinized, they settle down into an administrative hold of a stable empire, they give up this claim and they reformulate it. They reformulate it into being the foremost guardians of the Prophet's household and of true Islam, Shi'i Islam. The claim that they are Mahdis is something that is discarded and sidelined. So this is a period which sees a proliferation of land grants of various kinds. Not only do you have these powerful emirs and these soldiers that you have to place in the periphery and you have to situate in various parts of the empire, you have to pay for them. But of course, in a pre-modern economy, this is very difficult to do. And you also have that old Turco-Mongol mindset that regardless of whether these emirs are Turkmen or Kurdish or Georgian or whatever, they have this corporate culture and identity that really makes them ill at ease at being just mere employees of the state. They want their own little fiefdoms in the periphery. And that's why the state, the Safavid state, really builds relationships with local magnates by siphoning off different parts of the realm and giving it to them as appanages so that they can administer their own parcels, and they, at least if they don't administer, they have access to all of the resources and the revenues in those corners. One of the most important groups for this is the ulama. The ulama, just like the emirs and the grand viziers and the main tajiks in the realm, they are also given little parcels of territory where they live tax-free and beyond the remits of the central administration. And as time goes on, there's a problem because more and more parcels of land and revenue-generating estates have kind of slipped out of the hands of the Safavid central administration and been placed under an alim, an emir, a grand vizier, some local magnate or another. And the problem is that they are overwhelmingly tax-free. And many of them, especially the ones for the ulama, they are done under the notion of being an endowment, a pious endowment, which makes the tax exemption almost sacred. And there are some very interesting petitions to the Safavid court in the 18th century where a very angry and a very strident tone by one of these custodians is struck when saying, if tax officials from the Safavid chancellery show up to my estates that are part of my endowment, then their blood will be halal, and I will be within my rights to strike them down. So, and this letter is to the imperial chancellery. This is essentially addressed to the king. What you would expect is perhaps an equally ardent response by the imperial center. But actually, the Safavid chancellery, it responds and it says, yes, you are well within your rights to do this. I will ensure that no chancellery officials or taxmen will ever show up to your estate again. And the endowment that you have been given is sacrosanct, and we will uphold it. Nonetheless, there is an elaborate bureaucracy that oversees the commissioning and the administration, if not even the revenue collection, of all of these estates, whether they be secular states, so to speak, those given to the emirs, or those more sacral kind of endowments, the awqaf, waqf. And this is the period that you have very detailed administration manuals laying out the bureaucracy, how it fits into various provinces, what the role of the Grand Vizier is, what's his relationship with the various provincial administrators are, how they hold counsel with one another, what their duties are, what kind of documents are supposed to be distributed and handed back in, how they go through administrative procedures like tax collection, doing tax assessments, corroborating each other's ledgers. This is a very sophisticated and elaborate system that we have a pretty good picture of because of so many manuals and administrative decrees that have been left behind. So you have at the center of this the notion of Turk and Tajik. And of course, these are not really ethnic binaries by this time. Again and again, in the chronicles and in the documents of the time, the Tajiks are really the administrators of the realm. The Turks are identified, no matter what their lineage is, with the Ahlul Sayf, or the people of the sword, the men of the sword. And these two corporate, if you will, professional or socio-cultural categories are a very important way of thinking about not just administration in Safavid Iran, but also the Ottoman Empire, Mughal India, and Central Asia. This might give the impression that it's predominantly Turkmen and Kurdish emirs in the military and Persian-speaking bureaucrats in the administration. That's just not the case. Very early on, the Safavids realized that these Turkmen emirs, they have their own power bases, of course. They have their own tribes. And the tribes people, they have dual loyalties. Do we follow the tribal elder, or do we follow the imperial sovereign? And their bonds with the tribal elder, these are bonds of kinship. So this dual loyalty causes several civil wars, and at some points in Safavid history, these Turkmen emirs are managing to even get into succession disputes, where they throw their weight behind one candidate versus the other and cause the disintegration of the realm into civil strife. The Safavid dynasty realizes that it needs a loyal cadre of followers. It needs to diversify the military elements under its control. It can't overly rely on the tribal element anymore. And here you have something that you see again and again in history. With the Ottomans, with the Abbasids, the import of a slave community in order to set up a loyal and centralized slave corps of soldiers. For the Ottomans, they go and they do the devshirme, the kind of boy tax from the Balkan territories, where they take young Christian boys, take them to the imperial court, and train them as essentially an elite guard of warriors. These are the imperial household's kind of troops. And that successfully counterbalances against the Turkmen emirs. In Safavid Iran, they go to Christian communities in the Caucasus, overwhelmingly Armenian and Georgian communities. And these form an integral part of the ghulam system, the slave system, that is set up at the very heart of Safavid power, and especially Shah Abbas is successful in doing this, where he forges a 12,000 strong army of slave soldiers that manages to counterbalance against these powerful Turkmen tribal leaders. And that is the beginning of the diversification and stabilization of the Safavid dynasty. Outside of the military and administrative kind of contribution of the Caucasian Christians, what you see is they are an integral part of the economy. Why would the Armenians be such an important commercial asset in Safavid Iran? It's quite similar to Jewish communities in Europe. There are so many different Jewish communities all across the European landscape, and they hold in relatively close communication with one another, which makes them an excellent network for trade and commercial and information networks. And that's something very similar to the Armenian community that is spread across the Mediterranean, the Levant, the Iranian plateau, to some extent Central Asia and North India. And these communities intermarry with one another. They keep in good contact with one another. And the Safavids realize the importance and the kind of opportunity that the Armenian community provides. In Isfahan, they are given a neighborhood for themselves, New Jolfa. They are given endowments for their churches and cathedrals, and they are integrated into the economy, especially the silk economy. Iran is a major exporter of silk in this period, and it uses those networks of Armenian merchants to really export beyond the Ottoman Empire to Europe, especially to Mughal India, where purchasing power is so high, and across the Indian Ocean. And it's in this period that you see the flourishing of Isfahan. Originally, the capitals were in the South Caucasus. They were in either Tabriz or Qazvin, and that's a little bit too close to the Ottoman border. And the Ottomans, of course, managed to even reach Tabriz and sack it several times. So that's a very precarious kind of place to hold your capital. Shah Abbas moves it to the very center of the Iranian plateau. He moves it to Isfahan. And Isfahan, over a very short period, becomes a remarkably populous and wealthy urban center. You have merchants and artisans who are brought over and who themselves, of their own free volition, come there to set up bazaars and trade links in the Shah Jahan Square, the kind of the heart, the nucleus of the city. And whether it's Banyan merchants from India, whether it's the East India Company of England or the East India Company of the Dutch, the Portuguese and the Spaniards, Russian merchants, they all have a stake in setting down in this remarkably wealthy corner of the empire and forming links and getting customs and trade concessions from the Safavid court, making Isfahan one of the global centers of the economy, world economy in this period. And that is really where I wish to end it. I will just finish by saying that there is a very interesting talk that is going to be held as part of our Middle East seminars. And it's going to be at 5:15 in the old seminar room on South Street, Medieval History Building. It's on early Qajar Iran. So if you're interested in that, I will see you there. Goodbye.